In 1942, when I became 17, I raced down to the Moreton Naval Depot, and they had two what they call commissioned warrant officers, old fellows. That one was Carter and the other was Lever. One was fairly robust and the other was a little thin fellow. I saw the robust fellow when I went down on my 17th birthday to sign up for the Second War. And he asked me how old I was. When I told him I was 17, he asked me when. I said today, and he passed a remark about getting some sense, and he didn't talk too much to me, so I got up and left, and I waited for a couple of months, and when I went back the second time, I asked the fellow that I saw, could I see the little skinny bloke and not the fat bloke, and from that I was in the Navy. After many months waiting to be called up, from there I went to Flinders Naval Depot, where I did my training. And the first classes I went to, they were in a special service. Nobody could tell us what it was at that time. And when I was due to go away to get the medicals, I had tonsil trouble and I had to be operated on to get the tonsils out. So I missed that going on that draft up that then to a school where they trained for the landing ships. But I had my tonsils out, and there was one old lady who used to come over and visit us, and she found out I was a Queenslander, only young, and she brought me over a piece of pineapple. I didn't know much, but I bit into it, and then I had an awful trouble with my throat. The nurse that saw me have the pineapple said, good heavens, it should never have had that. So she took it off me and tried to soothe it as much as she could. She apparently went up to the line a couple of days later, which was an expression used to say that she went up to Melbourne, the city. And when she saw me the next day after she came back, she said she had a little treat for me. And I still think so wonderful, what a wonderful person she was. She gave me a mashed banana. And I thought that her being an officer, which the nurses were, and me just being an ordinary seaman, just passed out from ordinary seaman 2 to ordinary seaman 1 by turning 18, I thought she was a marvellous person and often think of her even at this late stage in my life. Came back into general service classes, from which I got a draft to Brisbane for the Corvette Ararat. On that draft, that was in early 1943. They went to Moreton, or Brisbane Depot it was then, and then they changed its name later to Moreton. In those days it was the end of Alice Street on the river, somewhere about where the Goodwill Bridge goes across today. And we spent our time in the depot waiting to be called over to Evans Deacon's shipyards, which we were after some weeks. And when we went over there, and I think they gave them, or made a mistake and given us, that is myself and another fellow, a tin of red lead and a hammer and a wire brush to get rid of some of the rust. We had very good eyes, and you could see little pinpoints, and nearly made the ship look like it had measles. It's red measles. went to sea eventually, and we took part in a convoy going from Brisbane to Sydney, where we went down and did the commencement of the exercises so that we got to know all parts of the ship and different things that would happen. Some of that was done in Sydney Harbour. I was the first buoy jumper, and that's, to me, wasn't too pleased. They took me in a motorboat and set me on the buoy with a hammer and a lead pellet, and when I was sitting on the buoy waiting for the ship to come up, and they threw a line which pulled a chain, and when you got the chain over there, you put the shackle through it, put the pin in, put the lead pellet in, and you called out that it was fixed. They then came in the motorboat and picked you up and took you back to the ship. That was my first experience with buoy jumping, and I wasn't too keen about it. From there we went up to the Hawkesbury River and did exercises in different ways. And from the Hawkesbury, after being completed, we rejoined in Brisbane, where we did convoy duty with the other ships. And then instead of having a nice light grey, it was in camouflage colours. From there we gradually moved our way up, convoying up to the north of Queensland, across the Coral Sea over to Moresby, escorting merchant ships with other escorts, of course. And from there we'd go through to the China Straits to Milne Bay, and gradually moved our way up the coast as different places were taken from the Japanese, like Finschhaven, where we operated from there, and then were escorted to different other areas, even over to the Admiralty Islands. But we didn't touch New Britain or New Ireland, that was Japanese territory. We did go round those places, but we were always looking for Japanese submarines, Rabaul being a fairly big base for them. They used to service the people down, their people down in Guadalcanal, and take them back. We did a fair bit of depth charge work there, but nothing was ever confirmed. Although we did see something queer in the water one day, like the top of a big container type thing, and Bungie Williams, the gunner on the after Oerlikon, and I was his number one loader. We were able to fire a few shots at it, and eventually it went down in the water, whatever it might have been. And I still bought the case, the brass case of one of those Oerlikon's shells. I've still got it at home. Then we came back escorting across the Coral Sea, and it was there that the depth charge got loose, and trying to hold it, but we couldn't. And the fellow on the heavy charges, the heavy one had a weight on it, and we had two racks with plus the 4 depth charge throwers. I was on the light rack and he was on the heavy rack, and why I don't know, but he only knew it. He took the key off the charge when he set it, and he got hold of the arm and to release it, and we couldn't. I jumped to stop it from rolling over the side, and another fella eventually came and gave me a hand, and we tried to hold it, but it rolled eventually over the side, and of course it exploded at the depth set. And later on, it was found that some plates were loose, letting a little water in down in near the engine room. And one of the leading stoker in the boiler room, he got knocked off his feet and broke a bone in his hand or his lower arm. From there, we went to Cairns to get that rectified in an American floating dock where they welded the plates. They didn't do any of the riveting. And when completed, we went back to sea, and the captain decided to drop a depth charge, and we got some fish. We got them at all shapes and sizes and different colours, so we weren't game to take a lot of them, so we let them, they were stunned or killed, and we picked out the good ones and kept it for our meals. Early in the times we used to go to Moresby, then later on we used to go down to Milham Bay through the China Straits. It was in the China Straits where we thought we'd try a local tribe at one time for some fresh fruit. And the chief, he came on board with the bargaining, and he decided he wanted a glass of water. And I fell for the job of taking him in to give him a glass of water. I didn't think, so I got the cup and filled it out of the cooler. He got hold of it and drank it. Next minute he just threw the cup in the air and went flying out through the passageway, holding his mouth. He must have had an awful lot of holes in there when the cold water struck. They went mad at me for giving it to him, but unfortunately I never give that a thought. Another time I was up in the crow's nest, and it was when the bow fighters first came in, and a couple of them were up flying there. They decided to use us as a target. I finished up, and I can always remember shaking my fist at the pilot and him with a great big grin. You can see him. That was the first commissioning, and then when we came back to Brisbane, I was drafted off, and the ship went down to Melbourne for its first refit. And when we returned to the ship, we were all drafted off. The captain was a bit upset that he was getting a new crew, but he just had to take it, I suppose. And I was returned to Moreton, or Brisbane Depot at that time. And whilst there, I was there for about 4 weeks. And then I got a crash draft. A crash draft is when you're there and they just tell you to pack your bag of hammock, you're going. You don't get any warning about it. And the girl driver at that time, there was a couple of the early girls that came in as drivers. She took me down to the Fairmile base where I joined the HGML 1329. And from there I went with that to Darwin, from where we operated, and that's where I finished my time in the war. The captain, Jim Morrison, coming home, decided to give us a wonderful trip, and always remember it approaching Thursday Island on the way back. I turned 21 and he gave me a drink in the wardrobe to celebrate my majority. And when we got to Thursday Island, he arranged for a beer issue for the crew and let us enjoy that. All in celebrating my birthday. We had a wonderful trip home on that, popping into little unknown places, I suppose, and seeing how life was. At one place we got a signal to an American plane that crash landed on the beach at, I think it was Pipeline Island, I think the name of it. And we got there and took them on board. And whilst there, the American small ship, they came and took the Americans from us and put them in. And I always thought to myself, when the tide came in, we had to swim in the aircraft. I often tell people I have to swim in an aeroplane. And Bruce Little, one of my shipmates on the ML, he rowed when the high tide, he rowed the dinghy in and out of the aircraft, so he had something to skate about as well. In the time that the leading steward, he had to go ashore for a couple of weeks or something with illness, and I unfortunately got the job of assisting the steward at that time. I just had to learn all that type of thing, how to serve the captain's drink when he came for his dinner. And he liked the gin and peppermint. I thought that Jerry, the steward, told me a nip of gin, a nip of peppermint, and which I made it and put it on the tray with the jug of water, take it over to the captain, go to put the water in and don't let too much get out, a few drops, and he will say, "Thank you." He'll then take the glass and scull it down. I thought I'd nearly choked him, and I can still remember his exact words. "Good God, steward, what have you done to my drink?" When I told him a nip of gin, a nip of peppermint, all I can hear him say was, "Good God, no, just a drop of peppermint." So I never ever put too much in again. Another time when I was steward, the gunnery officer was late for his meal, and Jerry would get the food from the galley or the kitchen from the officer steward, bring it down and set it out ready for serving. The gunnery officers, he put in the warming tray up until he came back. He sent the meal down on the plate, down on the lift to the outside the wardroom where I would take it out and take it in and serve it. When I took it out and put it on my hand, I threw it up in the air, it burnt me. Jerry had had it on hot instead of warm, and the plate was very hot. Unfortunately, that was all the meal that was left, and there was no more for the gunnery officer. So we spent time picking it up and putting it on another plate. And I've been never so nervous in all my life as to think that he was going to get a chip of the other plate when he was having his meal. But he didn't, thank heaven, so I was protected that day. I'm always fascinated by issue received from the Navy. They give you 2 white canvas suits, and the only purpose I ever used it for was or one of them was to pass my swimming test. They put you in your canvas suit. They had a small pool there, I think it was 25 metres, and you were supposed to swim halfway. What do you call this? Paddle and stop and wait for a minute or two until he told you to go, and then keep going. By that time, the canvas suit had really filled with water, and I just barely got to the other end of it when I could hardly get out from the effort. That's the way why they ever issue those. I'll never know, because that's the only purpose I ever used it for. Later on, one of the legs was handy to make into a meat bag when I was on the Fairmiles. I cut the leg off and patched it up to make it into a very nice meat bag. I've still got a jacket for that under the house in an old sea chest that my mum and dad used when they came to Australia. I always remember coming back escorting a Liberty ship. They were produced by the Americans during World War II, and they produced quite a number of them, and they were used for many purposes, troop carrying cargo, etc. And we were escorting one of them with troops on, coming back to Australia across the Coral Sea. And we took them to Townsville. Later on, we were having a drink with some army fellows, and they were talking about coming back from New Guinea and saying that they thought that the ship had gone under on a number of occasions, and it turned out to be our corvette that they were talking about. And that's how rough it used to get sometimes, and the corvette was a marvellous sea ship, even though it wasn't very big. I enjoyed my time on that, and also with the crew. I spent most of the time on the wheel as a helmsman, and there were 3 of us eventually selected by the captain as his helmsman to spend on the wheel. He didn't like some of the others, the way they used to carry on, or how they used to use the wheel itself. You used to be, if you set it to the wheel, you could, even though it was a bit rough and that, if you, instead of being midships, if you put a little bit of port wheel on it, you could get the ship going in a straight line. And apparently a lot of them never used to do that. They would swing it and swing the wheel all the time. The ship would be doing a little waver. That's why I think he took his... He was a merchant seaman as well as a Royal Australian Naval officer. And I think he relied a lot on his helmsman, and then he wanted his special ones, which he asked for. I always remember one time there that up in New Guinea they used to get big heavy rain and they scour out the river, and when they scoured out the river, this long with all the rubbish that came out used to be floating. I remember being on the wheel one time and a great big tree was dead ahead. I took it my own initiative. Nobody reported it. No, I took it my own initiative to steer round it, in which the captain noted. So I got a pat on the head that day. When I was in Darwin, they flew me down by Qantas aircraft on a fortnight's leave. And that took all day from early in the morning until about after 7 o'clock at night to land at Archerfield. That was a Qantas aircraft at that time. And after my 2 weeks leave, I thought I'd be going back by aircraft, and I had to report to the depot at Brisbane, and they told me that when I'd be going back, and I said, "Oh, how am I going, by aircraft?" They said, "No," and I said, "Oh, what, by train up through Mount Isa?" And they said, "No." I said, "Well, how am I going back?" "By train down through Melbourne, Adelaide." I can only look back and now and say thanks to whoever organised that, because it was a wonderful trip and a great sightseer going through from Brisbane to change trains over the border to the Kyogle, down to Sydney, change trains in Sydney down to the border at Albury, change trains to get to Melbourne, spent the night in the depot there, and then the train over to Adelaide. From Adelaide we went up in the big wide gauge up to, I'm not too sure if it was Tarawi or someplace, from which the Ghan at that time operated the narrow gauge. And we spent our time on that as a troop train. Your meals that were taken to you were generally might have been a can of bully beef and so much bread, and then you split it between two or three of you. You didn't have room on the train would stop and you'd all get off and have your meal. That took us through to Alice Springs, from which the no railway line, and we then spent 3 days in trucks travelling up. The trucks would stop at meal time. The or truck kitchen or whatever you call him, that truck would come by with all the rations and issue it out. Once again, you used to open the can and split it up between so many of you. We used to boil a billy, and the Air Force fellows got a bit jealous of us. So you boil the billy and then race up to somewhere to get the water. But when they did it, we used to do it on the edge of the road. They did it, unfortunately, they got too near the long grass and they started a fire. We often think, I hope it didn't do too much damage the way it went. But it was frightening to see it shoot up with a breeze come through and it'd go right up the trees. But we got through from that up to Larimar, and once again we got on the train, and this was particularly, must have been the oldest wagons, goods wagons, but there was only 7 of us Navy fellows, so they put us in the old, Red Cross wagon. It had bunks in it, on tin bunks in it to put the fellows who were ill when they were transferring them down south. We were also given the job of issuing out the food to the different other carriages. And once again, we used to give them tins and a loaf of bread, and that was it. That took us through to Darwin, and then back to the ship, which was great to see when you got there. One of the worst things that we were working when I was on the ML in Darwin Harbour, and one of the other crew, Bruce, I was painting and had my back towards him. He decided he'd like to see what a sea snake looked like out of the water, and he hooked it out, and it landed on the deck just near me. I never jumped so quick in all my life out of the road, and it went right over the side. I was almost tempted to throw him over after it. Gosh, it upset me. But fortunately he apologised, but it did give me a nasty fright. I did used to march with my dad on Anzac Day. I did it as a lad. Back in those times, they used to form up in Roma Street in there and in front of the City Hall in their earlier times in their religious groups, and then they were marched to the different churches. And the church used to put on a dinner for the ex-servicemen, which most of them stayed for. And then after the dinner and the speeches, they then went to form up in Roma Street in the different categories. And as a lad, I sometimes marched with my dad. And then after the war, we did a similar thing, and I marched with him for a couple of years, but then seemed to fade away. But I think he was quite proud of the fact that we're both ex-Navy and we could march together.